18 through 20.
Recording in progress.
And it reads these words. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. This is the word of God for the people of God. Well, and I have entitled the sermon, "The Rock of Revelation, Understanding Jesus in a Pluralistic and Nationalistic Era." A few people here have heard me say a few words about one of my favorite cartoons, Steven Universe. It is a children's science fiction story about these crystal gems on a mission to save the Earth. And they also have the responsibility of helping to raise a young Steven who is half human and half gemstone. As we watch Stephen grow up and journey with the gems, one of the major themes of the story is not only his grief, but also that he's trying to discover as much as he can about his mother, who he never knew. So he has to rely on other people's stories about her in order to understand himself better, how to continue her mission in the world, how to understand what things about her he wants to emulate. The only problem is that he meets people through the series. There are all of these conflicting stories about his mother from other gems and creatures who knew her at different points in her life. I mean, gems are thousands of years old, so there's all these different experiences from different eras and different points of history. So who she was really depends on who you ask. Everyone has a different perspective depending on who you're talking to. Some people experience her as very benevolent, nurturing, a positive example, a superhero, even. Others had much more difficult experiences. They recalled moments when she lost her temper, when she hurt other people, or some who drew attention to the imperialist power structure that she was a part of. Those people experienced her as quite selfish and violent. And it is all very confusing for this young Stephen, this child, as he tries to figure out how to make sense of all of this conflicting information. Difficult things he has to face about the past and his future. And of course, he will never have a completely full picture of who she was, but he gets to get these glimpses of her in experiences and conversations and relationships. He has these pieces of a puzzle that he somehow has to put together on his own. He has to decide, for example, if he's going to be a colonizing force in the world where everyone has to conform and bow down to the powerful, or if he's going to try and take what he knows and repair and heal the damage that has been done. But what becomes most important in this series is not what others say and not what others want for him, but what he believes himself and what he decides to do about it. What he decides to hold on to and let go of. Ways that he might want to follow his mother's lead and ways that he would rather pull away. carve out his own path, or finish what she started. But in order to do that, young Stephen has to silence the noise and figure out what he himself believes. As he grows and matures, he can no longer have his beliefs handed to him. He can no longer rely simply on what other people think about his mother or what they want for his life. He has to know it deeply for himself. He has to begin constructing his own belief system, his own value system, his own inner compass, which at sometimes may look like his mother, and other times it may look like something of his own. But the future of the earth depends on him developing his own understanding, aside from the noise and the rumors and the opinions of others. In our story today, Peter and his disciples are also being asked to decide for themselves who Jesus is. In a world where all kinds of conflicting messages are all around them, where all kinds of rumors are being told. Long ago, when Jesus was walking around with these disciples, they came upon a place called Caesarea Philippi. Situated about 25 to 30 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, Caesarea Philippi was a trade route that connected Tyre in the west to Damascus in the east. A nearby cave that housed a great spring that fed one of the sources of the Jordan River. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to visit this location, which is a very popular Christian tourist site. A cave and spring full of ancient shrines and Roman inscriptions. This site had long served as a sanctuary dedicated to the Greek god Pan. Greek inscriptions carved into the rock are still visible today, suggesting dedications to all kinds of other pagan gods as well. And eventually, it also became a place that honored Caesar, Augustus, the emperor, as a god to be worshipped. And that shrine that was made for Caesar was eventually given to Herod the Great, who we also know as a player in the state. The location of this event in Caesarea Philippi is no accident. A place of conflicting messages about religion, about politics, about who we are loyal to. It is no accident that Jesus starts the conversation at this place, a site that, as I said, is a place where many people around the world still visit today. Situated between pagan worship and Roman rule, Caesar's name and the powers that be would have hovered around the scene as Jesus asks this question, where Jesus decides to ask his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" It hangs in the air at the intersection of economic trade, religion, the power of the emperor. If Jesus were to take us to a modern version of this place, where would it be? Where would our empire shrines be located? As Jesus asked us, "Who do you say that I am?" What images might surround the background? Perhaps it would be a picture of Wall Street or Capitol Hill, tempting us with the allure of money and government. Maybe Jesus would ask us, "Who do you say I am?" when in the background there are symbols of American exceptionalism. There are symbols of the US dollar, the American flag, the Constitution, the Pledge of Allegiance, all rolling around in the background. Perhaps there would be billboards for Fox News and CNN, or donkeys and elephants across the background, representing the Democratic and Republican parties. Maybe he'd talk with us among symbols of materialism like credit card companies and corporations and banks all rolling like a slideshow in the background. Or maybe he'd meet us in places of our denominational headquarters. For Presbyterians, that's Louisville, Kentucky. That's where everything happens. Or maybe it'd be in front of giant mega churches that shout about sinners going to hell. As Jesus is talking, we can see all of these symbols moving behind him like a slideshow, one flickering after another, and he's asking, who do you say that I am? So Jesus says, of course, who do others say that I am? But more importantly, who do you say I am? His questions to the disciples is more about, it's more than an intellectual curiosity. It's not just about a theology or how pretty you can make it sound. It's a question not just about Jesus's identity, as if getting the titles right would earn somebody an A on a messianic quiz. It is a question that cuts to the core of your allegiance, your faith. In what or in whom will the followers of Christ place their trust? Will it be in the privileges deriving from access to opportunity and wealth? In the worship of prevailing culture's latest idols? In allegiance to the dominant power of earthly rulers? Or will they trust instead in the one whose life, death, and resurrection will soon reveal the mercy and justice of the living God? And so, in a society where earthly powers were often at conflict with loyalty to God, Peter's response is nothing less than amazing. We've talked about Peter in a number of ways. He's a very complicated creature. Sometimes he speaks out of turn. Sometimes he's really impulsive. Sometimes he's really silly. And Jesus is reprimanding him or correcting him. In fact, later in the story, if we were to read on, Jesus is rebuking Peter. But in this moment, Peter is clear. He is confident. He is certain. And there is one translation that says, Peter shouted out, "You are the Christ, Son of the living God." Christ, which means Messiah, the one who has been sent, the one who holds power and authority, the one who is worthy of our allegiance. This bold declaration in this place of Roman gods and paganism is the place where Peter has the confidence to shout out. In a place where the emperor was honored was quite dangerous. Peter is putting himself in a position where he's quite guilty of sedition, quite guilty of challenging those who are in power. And Jesus honors the bold action that this is. He says, Peter's answer did not come from human beings. It came from God. It was not based on rumor or the hearsay of others. Rumors in this time that said that Jesus was a prophet. If you remember, Jesus's family often thought that he was a crazy person, out of his mind. There were people who thought that he got his power from demons. All of these things rolling around. Yet here, Peter boldly declares, in the face of all conflicting information, who Jesus is based on his own experiences. And so, like young Steven Universe, he has to silence the noise in order to figure out what he himself believes and how he's going to move forward. He steps boldly into the dangerous terrain of competing loyalties and challenging the systems and structures of injustice around him. And it is from this declaration that the church is formed, an absolutely revolutionary moment where Simon becomes Peter, and Peter, which means rock. On this rock, the church will be built. For both Stephen Universe and Peter, being able to distinguish their own truth from the opinions of others was a moment of coming of age, maturing, growing up in their lives. And for us, the same is true. In the midst of the pluralistic society that we live on and the rise of Christian nationalism, we must work really hard to understand the identity of Jesus and its implications for our lives. Pluralism, of course, is the reality of living in a place where multiple views are represented, often views that conflict with one another. It is pluralism that allows people in society the freedom to practice whatever religion they want or to not practice at all. It is pluralism that draws people to a place where they can go to school and not have to be indoctrinated with a particular religion. It is pluralism that often challenges tradition or asks why certain beliefs have prevailed over time or why certain ones are risen above others. It is pluralism that allows one person in a room to say Jesus is Lord and another person to say Jesus was a really effective teacher, but that's really it. Pluralism in and of itself is not really bad. In fact, I argue that it needs protection and it needs celebration as we learn to embrace all of the diversity that exists in our world. And yet, if we are not careful, such a environment can often make our own beliefs blurry and unclear. And I would argue that as progressive Christians, we are often so outraged by the horrors of other Christians seeking to do harm that we are often afraid to make our own public declarations. For good reason, we don't want to step on toes or make anyone uncomfortable. We don't want to appear anti intellectual. We don't want to appear unloving or not tolerant. We don't want to be associated with Christians who are spewing hatred. But as a consequence, we often make our voices small and we resist talking about our Jesus at all. We approach our faith with an apology in an effort to heal the violence of history. On the other hand, Christian nationalism is something I think we should resist. We should push back as it has become increasingly more powerful in this country and in the world. Often associated with a particular political right-wing perspective, this is often the idea that one religion is the valid one, that it should destroy all other belief systems, that America is and should always be a Christian nation. And as a consequence, this often means that white is right, that straight is right, leaving very room for the rights of women and people of color and immigrants and people living in poverty, anyone else who is different. It is Christian nationalism that often equates, for example, the Bible and the Constitution. Often, this version of Christianity often claims that it is persecuted when challenged in order to maintain its own power and using force in order to get everyone to conform. And so throughout our lives, there will be all kinds of things, even in our society right now, that are pulling at us with opinions about who Jesus is. There will come a point in time where our political affiliations, our denominations, our pastors, our families, our friends, siblings, our Sunday school will all share with us their beliefs and their interpretations. But in the end, what Jesus asks is, who do you say that I am? Who will Jesus be for us? And on what rock will our church be built? A rock of oppression or a rock of inclusion? A rock of certainty or a rock of curiosity? a rock where all people are valued, or a place of conformity, a rock of cowardice, or a rock of speaking truth to power. And so, for all of us, the question that we are left with is not only what we believe, but what we're going to do about it. And so, in the strength of the Holy Spirit who teaches us what to say, may we all have the courage to speak boldly, like Peter does in this moment, about who Jesus really is and what difference that makes in the world. Amen. And now is your opportunity to share aloud what is moving in you and how this message might be speaking to you.
That was a lot. It made me think about a lot of things over the course of your message this morning. But mostly it makes me think about how I have felt in the last 10 or 12 years that I'm almost afraid to say that I'm Christian. Uh, not that I'm afraid of being a Christian, but afraid that I would be categorized with the right that has come along with this Christian nationalist. This is just a scary, scary thing to me. And reading more and more about it in the last 10 years is just really the last 5 years. It's been really scary. So my choice is for me to just say, I choose love. I don't choose hate. And just expressing that with other people, because they have reasons for why they believe what they believe that is so different than what I can understand and feel.
Right.
But it's no wonder that so many young people today are confused or don't want anything to do with religion because it's so despairing to them. They really don't understand, and they don't want to understand. So they just go as far away as possible. And that breaks my heart. That breaks my heart to think that some young people today won't ever feel the closeness of what Jesus has brought to us or what he makes available to us. And that's sad.
And yet they might find it in a different way. I'm thinking about how you were sharing the other week about the church, watching your children and your grandchildren and the church being out there, and we have to stop trying to bring them in, but to go out to them. I was thinking I had a lot of thoughts as well going through that. One thing was Alec, you posted about the difference between religion and spirituality. But I recently, for so long, just on social media, I would try not to be political. And I too am getting very scared. And somebody pushed my buttons the other day, and it was actually somebody who I used to work with. And she posted something about what God destroyed. They're teaching in the schools what God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah about, something like that. And that was like, oh. So I got on and I started quoting like the other sins of Sodom and Gomorrah and how the translation for homosexuality, and all that. And but my last line was what we're teaching in the schools is to respect each other and to be kind and loving, which is kind of what Jesus taught us to do, dot, dot, dot. And I realized that I'd been afraid to put myself out there before. Of course, being retired helps a lot. But a lot of times I think it's a waste of breath because there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to convince other people. And then I think, is that a cop out? As opposed to being bold and speaking out like you had said about Peter and in that environment. And I appreciate you sharing that context because that totally changed the understanding of that story for me. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good example of I don't think it's on. But a good example of, social media is one situation where like you often are, getting all of these different information from people, and especially people we knew in our life and respected. It can be really hard to like say, is it even worth my time? Should I have a conversation with them? Is it going to be worth it? And I'm not advocating for like social media arguments, but it is something to be able to say like, I do go to church. I am a Christian, or however you narrate that. I'm a follower of Jesus, and I don't think it's, it has to be interpreted that way. There are many scriptures that talk about what the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was, even scripture interpreting scripture. And it wasn't homosexuality. But being able to sort of give a different perspective is a powerful witness from someone who is a churchgoer and is a Christian, Yeah. Yeah, Andrew.
It's interesting thinking about like over the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, like the journey that I've been on spiritually and finding my spirituality. In my own queer journey, life journey, just coming to terms with my queerness and still kind of claiming Christianity in a way that because I don't know, like spiritually, like God sustained me through a lot of stuff, like my personal connection with God. I don't really know who God is. I think that the scriptures reveal stuff about him. Kind of like, and I feel like the depth and breadth of like who God could be is kind of like an iceberg. Like we only see parts of it. And like that expansiveness, it's really weird to like tell people that I am queer and a Christian. I still feel like I need to say it. And I've wrestled with it. Like, do I really need to do that?
Yeah.
And I don't think I need to. I don't think anyone has to. But I don't. I mean, but at the same time, like I don't know if I really have to. But I want to. Like no one's telling me what I need to do, and no one is telling any of us what we need to do.
Right.
But in the depths of like my heart and my convictions, inheriting this whole belief system, to discover it. Like I love that you used Steven Universe because I didn't think about it like that way, like referring to like your whole understanding of how life is supposed to be, what like who God is, what Christianity has kind of, like I said, I've inherited this thing, this whole belief system, and I like interact with it, and it's really weird, like to call myself a Christian. People who don't understand like why I'm queer Christian, like even like anti-religious or religious people and Christians alike, they all kind of like don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, I can see like on both sides. It's like, huh?
Why?
Yeah.
that freedom.
Mhm.
I get to sort through this stuff with my own conviction, with my own experiences. I don't know. It's just observation based on what you were sharing. I appreciate your message.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I don't think it's easy. I don't think that we necessarily have to end up at a certain place, right? But I think that we get to choose in what we've inherited, what is worth holding on to, and what feels true, what feels loving, and what we don't want to perpetuate or continue, what we want to change our minds about. It's a lifelong journey. And so I don't think that bold means that we have to have one particular landing place or even that it couldn't change. But there's something powerful in being able to say, I don't have to be a Christian the way that other people, say Christianity has to be or look like or whatever. Yeah, Theo.
I wanted to bounce off of that and also what was said earlier about how youth might find Christianity in unorthodox ways and share a little bit about my history with Christianity, because I had made the decision when I was like 16 to pretty much step away from it entirely after having some experiences such as I've mentioned that I have PTSD and I take some medicine in regards to it because I will wake up from nightmares 5, 6, 7 times throughout the night. Like my body cannot physically rest from the nightmares I have. And so I take a medicine that prevents you from having adrenaline rushes in your sleep so that I can sleep through the night. And I went to a church when I was like 16, when I was freshly diagnosed with my PTSD, and I had to sit through a sermon in the youth group about how if you have to take any medicine that helps you sleep, you are a lustful person of all things in the world. And that is a time when you kind of go, I'm going to step back and go have sleepovers with my friends instead for now on Sundays.
I don't think I've heard that one before.
Yeah, for real, right? It was like, of all the timing, it was a little bit funny though, because I was only really there because I was friends with the pastor's son. And so my friend did kind of get the guest preacher who was teaching youth group that day in a bit of trouble by talking to his dad, and they did remedy that. However, it's still that type of thing leaves a mark. And it's just always wild to me that people talk about being queer and Christian like they have to be two opposite things, like your queer identity will lead you away from Christianity or something. Because the thing that helped me like get comfortable with Christianity again as a topic that led to me applying for this job, because I have this lovely, beautiful person in my life. I call him my platonic soulmate. Like we made a pact like 4 years ago that someday we're going to live together forever, and we have held to that for our someday. Like he means the world to me, and he is an aromantic asexual, so not interested in anyone romantically, trans man who is a Christian. And he would sit down with me when I would have my silly little questions at 2 a.m. about, hey, will you break down your internal religious philosophy for me in intense detail at 2 in the morning? And he would do that. And he was the person who slowly helped me get comfortable with it again. And it led to me working here because y'all were the first church I encountered that had similar beliefs to the ones that he did. And so it's just always wild to me when people act like being queer will lead people away from Christianity, when this lovely, very queer person I know is the one who helped me get comfortable with it again, and is like, there's no competition within Christianity. So pretend I'm phrasing this better than I can think of right now. And he is one of the most Christian people I have ever met. Like Sir goes to church every Sunday and like does his devotionals and is like so like dedicated. We're both autistic. I'm pretty sure he's mentioned he has a special interest in Christianity and it shows. And I really do think it is true that sometimes like people can find different paths back to it from what is considered the norm.
Yeah. I really love that, Theo, because I think that that is a perfect example, I think, of what we're talking about, sort of entering in a world where there are these binaries of you have to be one thing or the other, and the strength that it takes to be who you are um, when that is the prevailing message is so beautiful and is so much a part of what I think the context of the story helps us to do is there's always going to be all of these conflicting things and there's always going to be people who tell us where we should fit and yet the story welcomes us to sort of push back on that even when it's unpopular or even dangerous. So yeah, I appreciate that.
We also have from Heather, she said, to Terrell's point, speaking out may not change the original author's point, but there are other readers on social media who may, in quotes, hear what you are saying.
This is true. Yeah, that's a really good point. The people who see the interaction could be like, I'm going to look that up. Yes, Alec.
I just wanted to say when you were talking about the spring that was I forget where you was where it was at, but you had visited. It just reminded me of where I've kind of experienced most of the spirit has been more outside of the church than actually inside the church. You know, going for my nature walks and you know being free of distraction and just seeing how everybody is just so distracted even within the church. And I was actually watching a video this past week of a musician that works in the church, and he was saying that how a lot of church musicians get really into the like the praise music and stuff, and people are so distracted by the praise music and getting this like almost emotional it's like he was saying like it being like almost an emotional addiction because the pastor is not even really preaching half the time. They're saying these buzzwords that get people like jumping and you know it's like it becomes so much about that and less about the actual teaching, the actual worship, the actual, you know, like learning, you know. So I think, you know, a lot of people are just distracted and aren't really getting, you know, like just hearing you preach, you know, and I'm just sitting here thinking, like I'm still thinking about the stuff you're saying, you know. I'm probably gonna be thinking about it for a couple days. You know, like that should be how you should lead, you know, the thinking, the what can I do, the love, the unity, the peace. Like people aren't leaving churches like that, you know. So I think that's what we're saying is, you know, nobody's learning, nobody's getting fed, nobody is, you know, really understanding what they're doing. Everything is tradition, distraction, and you know, those buzzwords, which now you're seeing in politics as you see people coming together, they say these buzzwords, people are getting riled up, and it's just become an addiction. You know, so when I saw that video, I was like, oh, I never thought about it like that. You know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I definitely can see that. And yeah, I mean, there's just if there's anything that I would just want us to just really be encouraged is like to move through some of that fear when talking about your journey because I experience it too. Like, and I'm like a pastor. So I'm like, they see me as like a super, super Christian. And I'm like, "Ugh, but I'm not though." Like, and it's hard to say like what that means. Like, I believe these things, I do it in this way. The people around me, are inclusive, are loving, are justice oriented. And sometimes you feel like I don't even have enough time to explain all of that. But people need to see that there are so many different types of pastors, there are so many different types of beliefs, and so many different ways to live out what Jesus teaches. And in a way that we hope is loving and compassionate and all of these things. But we need to speak out, and we need to sort of give an alternative story to what we're hearing and seeing. Mhm. Yeah, did you want to speak? Okay. All right, and the first.
Hi, my name is Ryan. We drive past this church all the time. We live here in Middletown. We're not Christian. We actually practice earth-based spirituality. But what was coming up for me is that I have a lot of shame and like resentment surrounding. I grew up in a Pentecostal kind of like a cult. And so I had to like undo a lot of that shame. And I felt like as a woman, my identity and my sexuality was very objectified in the Christian sphere. So I like went away from it. But what was coming up for me in your ministry was that Jesus, he stood for a lot more than the way that I was brought up to think. A person who went against his government, who was very pro the marginalized, who was unafraid to speak up. Those are things that like, I don't know that I could do that today. I worry about, could I do what he did and, risk going to jail, just for my own beliefs. So I feel like there's a lot to admire about that and to learn from that. And it's so nice to be in a space where you don't experience the right wing stuff that I was growing up with, that it does feel more inclusive. So I think, thinking about, could my relationship with Jesus be different? Is this a way that I can like, heal some of that? So, yeah, thank you.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for being here and being vulnerable to share. Yeah, a lot of what you said, I think resonates with me, and I think resonates with others. So absolutely would love to hear more, and have you be, able to teach us, as well. And so I really, really appreciate that. That's great. Yeah. Okay.
The post that I shared, I think it said something about because it was religion versus spirituality. And the religious part was one, belief being the true belief, but the spiritual part was unity regardless of spiritual beliefs. And so like with the I forgot your name already, but did you say it was Ryan? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not good with remembering stuff. But with you being here, it's about unity regardless of whether you believe what we believe or not. So like that's what I wanted to just kind of make sure that you understand or feel that,
That's beautiful.
Real quick, when you were sharing about like people having expectations, being super Christian.
Yeah.
and that, your podcast addresses so much of that, which is so neat because all the different topics that you explore are things that would never have included into Christianity. And in some ways, people are like, you can't talk about astrology, or you
Right.
can't talk about, ooh, that's,
Yeah.
that's the devil, So I love how you're, expanding the boundaries of, what spirituality is.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I hope that that invitation continues for us, to continue to push those boundaries and continue to even reclaim some of the things that were always there, that were always a part of tradition that maybe have been pushed aside, or maybe have been swallowed up by the stronger powers. And so some of it is reclaiming things that have always been there. And so let us continue to journey together. This is a beautiful conversation that I hope continues. Am I missing anyone else on Zoom? Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for engaging, for being vulnerable and sharing. Let us continue to think about what our own journeys might look like and what that might, how that might influence our community and the world at large. And so we'll turn our attention now to our